Sarah died at 42, and everyone said she was such a nice person. They said it at the funeral, in the comments on Facebook, and while holding coffee cups with both hands, as if trying to warm something that had gone cold years ago. She was nice, agreeable, kind. She never caused problems. And that's exactly what killed her. Not the cancer, though that's what the death certificate said. The cancer was just the bill coming due for 3 decades of swallowing every no that tried to climb up her throat, for smiling through every boundary violation, for turning her spine into a wishbone that anyone could snap for good luck. Her last words to her sister weren't, "I love you" or "I'm scared." They were, "I'm sorry for being such a burden." She apologized for dying. You know someone like Sarah. You might be someone like Sarah. And here's the thing no one wants to say out loud, the thing that makes people uncomfortable at dinner parties: niceness, the kind our culture celebrates and rewards. This kind of person gets you called sweet, easy to work with, and such a team player, is often just cowardice with better publicity. It's a slow-motion self-murder, dressed up in pleasantries and concern for others. It's the insidious agreement you made somewhere around age 7 that your existence is fundamentally an imposition, and the only way to justify taking up space is to make yourself as frictionless, as digestible, as non-threatening as possible. I knew a man named David who was the nicest guy in his office. 23 years at the same marketing firm. He'd stay late to help colleagues with their presentations. He'd take on extra projects when asked. He'd nod enthusiastically in meetings while his own ideas evaporated unspoken in his chest. His annual reviews were glowing. Great team player, very collaborative, always willing to help. He was promoted exactly once, to senior coordinator, a title that meant nothing and came with a 2% raise. Meanwhile, Marcus, who started the same year, who said no approximately 60% of the time, who protected his calendar like it was a sacred text, who occasionally made people uncomfortable by actually saying what he thought, became VP of strategy. David's wife left him after 18 years, not for another man. She said she left because she'd realized she had no idea who David actually was. "You agree with everything," she told him. "You like whatever I like. You want whatever I want. It's like being married to a mirror, except the mirror is always apologizing for reflecting." David came home to an empty house and still said, "Sorry," out loud to no one. The mechanism here has a name, and it's not what you think. It's not low self-esteem, though that's part of the weather system. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called it the false self, a protective shell we construct when our true impulses, authentic reactions, and real desires were met with withdrawal, disappointment, or punishment in childhood. The child learns that love is conditional on being good, on being easy, on not making waves. And because the child needs love more than it needs selfhood, because love is literally survival when you're small and helpless, the trade is made. The true self goes underground. The false self, the nice self, the accommodating self, takes the stage. And this false self is brilliant at its job. It gets approval. It gets validation. It gets called mature and considerate. What it doesn't get is a life. But here's where it gets complicated, because there's an argument that needs to be made, and it's a good one. Isn't kindness a virtue? Isn't consideration for others what separates us from sociopaths? Isn't the problem with the world precisely that there isn't enough niceness, enough empathy, enough putting others first? And yes, that's true. That's absolutely true. But we're not talking about kindness here. Kindness is clear-eyed and boundaried. Kindness says, "I see you, I care about your well-being, and I'm going to tell you the truth even if it's uncomfortable." Niceness says, "I'll tell you whatever keeps you from being upset with me." Kindness is generous from overflow. Niceness is generous from a deficit, a frantic offering to the gods of approval so they won't strike you down. Real compassion requires a self to give from. Niceness is what you do when you're not sure you have a self at all. I watched this distinction destroy someone I loved. My friend Rachel was a therapist, which should tell you something about the kind of person she was. She entered the helping profession because helping felt safe. If she stayed focused on other people's needs, she'd never have to look at her own. She was extraordinary at her job. Her clients adored her. She'd extend sessions when they were in crisis, answer texts at midnight, and reduce or waive her fees entirely for people who were struggling. Her colleagues called her a saint. Her body called her something else. At 36, she had chronic migraines, TMJ from grinding her teeth, and a digestive system that had essentially stopped working. Her supervisor, one of the good ones, finally sat her down and said, "You're not a therapist, you're a hostage, and you're teaching your clients that love means self-annihilation." Rachel cried for 2 hours, not because the feedback was harsh, but because it was the first true thing anyone had said to her in years. She tried to change. This is important. She actually tried. She started ending sessions on time. She turned off her phone in the evenings. She raised her fees to match her experience. And 3 things happened. First, she felt like she was dying. The anxiety was so severe that she went to the emergency room twice, convinced she was having a heart attack. Second, 2 of her longtime clients left, angry and hurt, telling her she'd changed and that she wasn't the person they thought she was. Third, and this is the part that no one warns you about, she started to feel something beneath the anxiety. It was faint at first, easy to miss. It felt like space, like room to breathe, like maybe, possibly, the beginning of actually existing. But Rachel's story doesn't have a clean ending, because real life doesn't work that way. She didn't transform into some boundary-setting warrior goddess. She lost half her client load in that first year. Her income dropped by 40%. She had to move to a smaller apartment. Some of her friendships fell apart when she stopped being the person who always listened, always helped, always showed up. She went to therapy herself and discovered that beneath all that niceness was rage, decades of it, frozen solid. And here's the failure part, the part we have to sit with. By conventional metrics, Rachel's attempt at authenticity looked like a collapse. Financially, professionally, socially, she lost ground. But about 6 months into this process, she told me something I think about constantly. She said, "I can feel my hands now. I don't know how to explain it. But for 36 years I couldn't actually feel my hands, and now I can." The neurological reality is this: chronic people-pleasing and chronic self-abandonment actually rewire your brain. The amygdala, your threat detection system, becomes hyperactive. It starts to interpret the possibility of someone's disappointment or anger as a survival threat. And the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's supposed to help you assess reality and make conscious decisions, becomes a servant to that fear. You're not choosing to be nice. You're having a fear response and calling it virtue. The vagus nerve, which regulates your ability to feel safe and connected, gets stuck in a chronic state of fawning. That's the technical term, the 4th trauma response after fight, flight, and freeze. It's the "I'll become whatever you need me to be so you don't hurt me" response. And when you spend decades in that state, you lose contact with the signal that tells you what you actually want, what you actually feel, who you actually are. Psychologist Alice Miller wrote about this, though she framed it differently. She talked about the drama of the gifted child. Children who were so attuned to their parents' emotional needs that they became emotional service providers before they'd even developed a self. These children often become the good ones, the successful ones, the ones everyone admires, and they grow into adults who are hollow. They achieve things, they're admired, but there's no one home. The lights are on, but the house is empty. Miller argued that this adaptation, this premature self-sacrifice, creates a particular kind of suffering in adulthood, not the dramatic suffering of obvious trauma, but the quiet suffering of never having existed in the first place. Thomas worked in tech, made $200,000 a year, and had what everyone called a great marriage. He and his wife, Jennifer, never fought, ever. Their friends joked about it. "You two are so healthy," they'd say. "You communicate so well." But here's what was actually happening. Thomas had learned very early that conflict meant abandonment. His mother had been depressed and fragile. Any strong emotion from him, anger, disappointment, even too much joy, seemed to drain her further. So he'd learned to be careful, to manage her, to read the room and adjust himself accordingly. He brought this skill into his marriage. Jennifer would express a preference, and Thomas would immediately align with it. Jennifer would be upset about something, and Thomas would fix it, smooth it over, make it better. He was so nice. And Jennifer felt like she was married to a very sophisticated algorithm. After 10 years, she asked for a divorce. Not because Thomas did anything wrong, because he never did anything at all. He never pushed back, never revealed a preference that might conflict with hers, never seemed to want anything for himself. "I feel like I'm the only person in this marriage," she said, "and I'm so lonely." Thomas didn't fight the divorce. Of course he didn't. He helped her move out. He was understanding, gracious, even. And then he sat in their apartment, his apartment, now, and something broke. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a bone breaking underwater. He realized he'd spent 43 years becoming whatever would keep people from leaving, and they left anyway. The deal he'd made, the fundamental bargain of his entire existence, had failed. And in that failure was the first honest moment of his life. This is what I mean when I say failure is a feature. Thomas lost his marriage. By any conventional measure, that's failure. But that failure was the crack that let the truth in. He started, tentatively, to ask himself what he actually wanted. Not what would make Jennifer happy, not what would make his mother comfortable, not what would keep his colleagues placid. What did he want? The question was so unfamiliar, so foreign, that it took him 6 months to even begin to formulate an answer. He started small. He realized he hated his apartment, the one they'd chosen together, all clean lines and neutrals. He'd always wanted color, warmth, something that felt alive. So he painted a wall dark green. It felt like a revolution. His hands shook as he did it. Then he quit his job. This is the part where people think the story becomes inspirational, but it doesn't. He didn't quit to start some wildly successful company. He quit because he'd finally admitted that he'd chosen tech because it pleased his father, and he hated it. Hated every single day of it. He took a 60% pay cut to work as a middle school science teacher. His father didn't speak to him for a year. Some of his friends thought he'd had a breakdown, and maybe he did. Maybe breakdown is just the clinical term for finally letting yourself fall apart when holding it together is killing you. Viktor Frankl, a neurologist and Holocaust survivor, wrote about something he observed in the concentration camps. He noticed that the prisoners who survived longest weren't necessarily the physically strongest or the ones who complied most readily with the guards' demands. They were the ones who maintained an internal core, a private self that couldn't be touched. He called it the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. But here's the part that gets left out of the inspirational quotes, maintaining that freedom required saying no to the constant demands for total submission. It required internal defiance. And many of those who survived physically later talked about the years of psychological work required to integrate what they'd endured, to reconnect with themselves after having to split off so much to survive. Frankl's point wasn't that you should be nice to concentration camp guards. It was that even in the most extreme conditions of powerlessness, the human spirit requires a line, a place where you say, "This is still mine, you cannot have this." But you're not in a concentration camp. You're in a life you've made safe by making yourself small. And here's the brutal truth. Most of you won't change. Statistically, behaviorally, psychologically, most people don't. Studies on behavior change show that even when people know their patterns are destroying them and have the resources and support to change, the success rate hovers around 20%. Because change isn't about information. You already know that your inability to say no is a problem. You already know that you're disappearing. The issue is that the false self, the nice self, has kept you safe. It's kept people from being angry with you, from abandoning you, from seeing you as difficult or selfish or bad, and the terror of losing that safety feels bigger than the terror of losing yourself. The fear is ancient and proverbial. The infant fears that if you're not good, you'll be left to die, and no amount of adult reasoning can fully touch that fear. Rachel didn't become a boundary-setting warrior. Thomas didn't find perfect happiness. Sarah died still apologizing. Most of the people who recognize themselves in this, and you do recognize yourself, don't you, in at least one of these stories, will close this window or tab or app, feel uncomfortable for a few hours or days, and then return to the familiar choreography of being nice. Because being nice works in a way. It doesn't get you a life, but it gets you through life. It doesn't get you a connection, but it gets you proximity. It doesn't get you love, but it gets you people who appreciate your usefulness. The unglamorous reality of changing this pattern is not a weekend workshop or a boundary-setting script you found on Instagram. It's feeling like you're going to die every time you say no. It's the actual physical sensation of your nervous system screaming that you're in danger because someone is disappointed in you. It's watching people leave when you stop contorting yourself to keep them. It's the grief of realizing how much time you've already lost. It's the rage at everyone who benefited from your self-betrayal and called it your kindness. And it's the even harder rage at yourself for letting it happen, even though you were just a kid when you learned to do this, even though you were doing the best you could with what you had. But here's the small, strange thing they don't tell you. When you start to reclaim yourself, when you start to let the false self crack, your body knows before your mind does. Rachel could feel her hands. Thomas noticed he could taste food again, really taste it, after years of eating as a pure function. Another friend, Maria, told me that after she finally confronted her mother about decades of emotional manipulation and guilt, after the worst conversation of her life, after her mother stopped speaking to her, she slept through the night for the first time in 15 years. No melatonin, no medication. Her body, released from the constant vigilance of managing her mother's emotions, simply rested. You're standing at a choice you've been avoiding your entire life, and it's not between being nice and being an asshole. It's between a life that looks good from the outside and one that feels true from the inside. It's between the approval of people who only like the carefully curated version of you and the possibility of actual intimacy with people who can handle your reality. It's between safety and existence. And there's no version of this where you get both. The script you've been following promised that if you were good enough, accommodating enough, selfless enough, you'd be loved. And you've been good. You've been so good. And you're still alone, aren't you? Still hollow. Still waiting for permission to take up space. The people-pleasing didn't fail because you weren't good enough at it. It failed because it was never designed to succeed. It was designed to keep you small. You'll probably do nothing with this. You'll recognize the pattern, feel the discomfort of recognition, and then find a way to make peace with your cage. You'll tell yourself it's not that bad, that you're being dramatic, that other people have it worse, that you're actually fine. And you'll be right. In a way, you'll be fine. You'll survive. Sarah survived for 42 years. The question isn't whether you can survive being nice. You clearly can. The question is whether you're willing to do what it actually takes to live, and the answer to that question isn't in your head. It's in what you do next, in the next 7 days, the next time someone asks you for something you don't want to give, the next time you feel that familiar pull to abandon yourself, to keep the peace. No one's coming to save you from your own niceness. This one's on you.